Therapists of Reddit, what made you realize you were treating a sociopath? If you enjoy this video, please subscribe to my channel, where I upload daily videos. I worked in a locked inpatient psychiatric unit for 5 years. I saw many things that scared me, but the most bone-chilling patient I ever worked with was a handsome, charming 35-year-old man we will call Mark. On our unit, if you told your nurse you were actively suicidal, you were placed on a 1-to-1, meaning you had a staff person assigned to you at all times to be in any room you were in to make sure you didn't hurt yourself. Mark nonchalantly came up to his nurse this particular day and stated he was suicidal and needed assigned a staff personal. Even though we knew, or so we thought because you can't be 100%, that he was lying, we had to provide him with a 1-to-1. I was the only available staff person and was therefore assigned to him. He asked me to walk laps on the unit with him. I said sure. As we walked, he asked seemingly meaningless questions about things like my favorite food or holidays I enjoy. I am always cautious about giving out information and felt his questions were harmless. About an hour into our walking, he commented that he gathered I cared deeply for others. Then took his head and smashed it through a glass window. Blood gushed from his face and glass was stuck all over his head. We had to transport him by ambulance to our emergency department. 2 days later, he returned back to our unit, medically and physically cleared. Upon coming back, he came up to me to apologize for scaring me, winked, and walked away. I fully believe he caused pain to himself to put that ever terrible visual in my head and scare me into knowing that if he could so easily hurt himself, he could do the same for others. I've worked with a few. The most disturbing one was an ex-military guy. He had served time in Iraq in the early 2000s, and he had killed in the line of duty. He always seemed a bit off, but the story he told me that was like, holy hell, he's a sociopath, was when he told me about how he would do things like kill goats, because he could get away with that, and some families there depend on livestock to survive. He also told me about making starving children fight over candy. He talked about watching kids fight to the death with rocks over candy he would throw on the ground. Awful, scary stuff. This person is currently a free man. The second was more of a stereotypical sociopath. He had been arrested for drug possession, and during the arrest attempt had stabbed himself a few times while trying to stab the arresting officers. He was very sharp, but intentionally chose the life of a drug dealer because it was violent. I don't think he ever actually killed anyone, but he definitely abused people pretty horrifically. He dealt meth and enjoyed power tripping off messing with desperate addicts. He would make them do gross, painful, awful things to earn their fix. He was also the only antisocial person I've ever met who had a weakened pain response. He once stabbed himself with a pen to prove to me he didn't feel pain. And I mean like a legit, buried the pen in his flesh, blood everywhere kinda stab. Yeah. They came into the hospital after making a suicide pact with someone and didn't follow through with it, and the other person completed. Acted really broken up and said they felt guilty about it and seemed genuine. It was all an act. Later on during the inpatient stay, they made another suicide pact with another patient who then told us about it and said the sociopath was pushing them to come up with a plan and pick a date to do it. Apparently they had done this with like 3 other people, and getting admitted to psych units was their way of finding vulnerable people to target. I've been a licensed therapist for going on 3 years now, but I've been seeing clients, with an intern license, for about 5 years. The vast majority of my clients have been on probation or parole and have had a wide range of mental illnesses, including antisocial personality disorder, ASPD. My mentor described folks with ASPD like this: it's in the eyes. They've got shark eyes, cold and predatory, like they're staring right through you, looking for your weaknesses to exploit. And, having worked with several people with that diagnosis, and adolescent precursor conduct disorder, it's pretty damn accurate. People with ASPD are some of the most manipulative people around, and many of them enjoy it. Manipulating people is almost a game to them, well, a mini-game to indulge in while they work on whatever else they're planning, even if it's as simple as present as normal. And, let me tell you, they're good at it. It's incredibly difficult to outplay someone with the diagnosis at their own game because they've been playing it their entire lives. Since my clientele are court-ordered, most of the manipulation revolves around trying to cover up whatever else they're doing. Abusing their domestic partner, abusing substances, etc. Some are more impulsive than others with the diagnosis, but they all have the shark eyes. Not a therapist, school psychologist. When talking to a student, he casually mentions how he keeps his parents in line by threatening to call ICE to have his mother, undocumented, deported. He doesn't care about his family in the least, and they have zero control over him. His 2 siblings are typically developed and are terrified of him. I used to work in a group home for little kids, under 12, with severe behavior problems and psychiatric issues, as a floor staff while I was in college. Several of those kiddos had diagnoses of ASPD, but I was always skeptical because that's a hell of a label to give to a little kid. And then I met AP, not his real initials. This child was 6 years old, and beautiful. He was perfectly behaved, but many of our residents had a honeymoon period of great and normal behavior for a couple weeks after intake, so we were just waiting for him to show his true colors, behavior-wise. His honeymoon period lasted 8 months. None of the staff knew why this kid was there. His dad wasn't in the picture and mom was serving time, and foster care wasn't working out, which is why we had him, but we didn't have any issues with him at all during those 8 months. He was a perfect little boy. Then one day, he wasn't. I took the kids outside to ride bikes, and the second he was out the door, he ran to the backyard, grabbed a kitten, and crushed its head. The boys' bedrooms were in the basement of the house, they had windows that were on the ground level outside, and he had seen the nest of kittens from his window. I was horrified, obviously, and brought all the kids inside. He calmly told our facilities manager that he had no idea what I was talking about, and looked so confused that the manager questioned me, and I had to go get the dead cat. I was visibly upset, and AP just looked at me and grinned. That was the first oh crap moment of several. AP would instigate aggressive behavior to initiate a restraint. Once in a restraint, our procedure was to hold the child for 30 minutes. If they weren't calm at that point, the on-call nurse would give a booty dart, shot of Benadryl, to calm the kid down. AP loved needles and offhandedly mentioned once that it was his goal to get 1 shot a day. In another incident, 2 staff had to escort AP into a secluded area because he was being very violent. During the transport, something happened, I think the metal door shut on him, and AP cut his foot substantially. We went to get the nurse, and when she came to help him he was laughing, digging at his cut to make it bleed more, and writing on the wall with the blood. Most of our kiddos were wards of the state, but AP's grandparents actually came and visited him. The other kids would be so jealous, but AP would, quite convincingly, act like he didn't know his grandparents, and then later he would taunt the others who never had visitors. When I left that job, he gave me a picture he drew of me. It was a typical little kid picture, but there was an X over the mouth and the eyes were scribbled out. I asked him why he drew me that way, and he said, "You don't deserve eyes because I don't like it when you see me. You don't deserve a mouth because you say things I don't like." I still work with kids with severe behavior problems, psychiatric issues, and severe disabilities. I love them. I have worked with hundreds during my career. I still think about AP. Soon after I left, they transferred him, at 7 years old now, to a more restrictive environment, and the last I heard he was the facility's success story. Mom got clean and he's back home with her, a perfect angel, and he even comes back to the group home to give motivational talks to the other kids on how to behave. I truly hope that's true and his treatment was successful, but that was one scary little kid, and I doubt it. Not a therapist, but was counseling a student. The student was female, 15, smart, had a good amount of friends, and liked cutesy things. Here's some things she said to me that made me suspect something was really wrong with her. Keep in mind that I have no qualifications to diagnose someone. I just think she's abnormal. Was dating a boy. Told me she had no feelings for him, but was dating him because he was useful and did things for her. She did nothing in return for him, and he was very sad about it. When I asked her if she felt bad for making him sad, she told me, "No. If I make him sad, that's his problem. Why do I have to care about his feelings? I can't feel what he feels. It doesn't affect me." When I asked her if she felt guilty for using him, she said, "No, he started hanging around me because he likes me. If he likes me, then he should make himself useful to me. What else is he good for?" She had no concept of romantic affection, but that may have been excusable for a 15-year-old depending on maturity. She told me her friend's dog had died and she pretended to care because that's what she was supposed to do, but it was her friend's problem and she didn't understand why she was supposed to feel anything about the situation. She told me that one of her teachers had told her friend to stay away from her because the teacher noticed that her facial expressions often seemed faked and forced. She did not understand why this was an issue and asked me, "Doesn't everyone fake emotional reactions? Like if someone tells a joke, don't you pretend to laugh? Or if someone tells you someone died, don't you pretend to feel sorry for them?" She asked me to explain to her what genuine emotion felt like, and what empathy felt like. After both explanations, she was completely confused and told me that she had no idea what I was describing and had never even suspected that everyone around her wasn't faking emotion and empathy just like she was. She left the conversation convinced that she was normal, and everyone else was just weird. She was also very caught up in her image, particularly her speech. She was careful to use slang and a cutesy tone of voice when speaking to adults and peers because she said, "I'm only 15. It would be weird if I didn't talk like a 15-year-old. Everyone else speaks this way, so I do too. I'm young, I have to act young." I work in a residential substance abuse program. I don't take offense to most clients' behaviors. They were in the midst of their addiction and they're trying to get better for any number of motivators: self-referral, family, probation/parole mandated, etc. I've worked with convicted murderers whom were remorseful and great to work with, so whatever, let's do some work together. But I'll speak of one person whom I believe to have antisocial personality disorder. After approximately 30 minutes talking to him during intake, I could tell how well he might be able to manipulate those he believes are dumber than him, and he stated as much. He mimicked my language, posture, he spoke eloquently, and was charismatic as all hell. But something was just off. I take note, and move on, needed more data. And as he continued in the program, it became apparent. Everything was someone or something else's fault. Failed relationships, his addiction and particular drugs of choice, his inability to hold jobs, no accountability or responsibility. He even blamed his brother for getting upset that he, my client, stabbed his brother. After my client had stolen his brother's car in the dead of night and drove it in a ditch and abandoned it, then he lied about it and stabbed his brother for being annoying. He manipulated other clients and staff, and was damn good at it, except for a few of us who would call him out in group sessions or through behavioral contracts. He was my individual client, and during a session, I was challenging him because there were inconsistencies in something he shared. Then he finally came clean. He is HIV+, I was aware of this. He contracted HIV by cheating on his partner or sharing a needle. He and the person he cheated with shared needles. He had discovered he was HIV+ prior to his partner's return, as they were gone for an extended period of months. He got on treatment, and then didn't tell them at all. Still hadn't at the time I stopped working with him, and I believe they are still together. Additionally, he shared that he drugged this partner, whom had a family history of meth abuse and had never used as much as a joint, for his own pleasure, multiple times, sober and high. The partner would have severe anxiety attacks after acts, which he convinced them they were, and they believed him. You could see his whole freaking body light up in relaying these acts. He laughed and stated that he couldn't believe that they believed and trusted him. A complete disregard for others. This wasn't the only thing he shared that made me want to hang a warning sign around the guy. He completed treatment by going through the motions and is now out in the community. He is young. I have a strong feeling that at some point he will move to even more malicious acts, and I wouldn't be surprised if he kills someone in the future. Not a therapist, but I am a teacher and gave my bachelor's in psychology. I'm about to go back for my master's in counseling. I work in an elementary school. I started there 3 years ago when the boy in question was in 3rd grade. I knew something was off about him, but I didn't have much interaction with him. Fast forward a year, he's in 4th grade, and since I work primarily in 4th and 5th grade, I'm having to deal with him a lot more. He mimics behaviors, has cold eyes and stares through people like he's dissecting them. He's very manipulative, but unfortunately, for him/fortunately, for us, he's so wrapped up in pleasing himself and getting what he wants, he's not charming at all. Very manipulative, but lacking charm. He was violent and would hit and kick other kids, which he was repeatedly written up for, and also threatened to torture and kill them to get them to do what he wanted them to. Towards the end of 4th grade it came to a head. We were at recess playing a huge game with a lot of the 4th and 5th graders and he essentially got out. He freaked out and hit the kids who for him out. When he saw I was getting the behavior/incident report out, he ran at me. I guess because I'm a 5 feet 5 inches female, and am overweight, he wasn't expecting me to be as strong as I am, but he tried to tackle me, and instead I planted myself and he bounced off. He tried to punch me and the other teachers I was with called for backup. I just kept blocking his punches and kicks until the main disciplinary officer showed up. All the whole this kid's is screaming details of how he's going to torture me, and I mean details. At over point when the disciplinary officer grabbed him, he told me he was going to use my intestines to strangle me. Reports were written and he had to go to inpatient treatment. He's back now, towards the end of 5th grade, and while he's less violent now, and doesn't threaten anyone, he's still very manipulative. He scares me. Female who is believed to have ASPD here, yes. I fake empathy in all my emotions. It's not to manipulate though, but merely to fit in due to societal pressure. People are weirded out if you don't react or mirror their emotions to a certain degree. I work in customer service, so I have to be good at meeting people halfway in the emotion department. My coworkers are endless amused by the hard switch in my facial expressions once a customer can no longer see me. I also was told by a male coworker that I was the most terrifying type of person, because I'm unreadable and can feel rage with a smile on my face. I don't care to manipulate people, I try to minimize it. I'm never going to be a serial killer. Shit, I have a loving family and am even doing well parenting an extremely emotional child. I just literally have no emotions or desire to make human connections. I do so because I am educated enough to know you should. I think females with ASPD are much different because we try to adhere to societal rules more than men due to how we're conditioned from a young age. Do you feel love for your child? At first, no. He's 11 and I do love him. I don't think it's the same as other parents though. I also struggled with showing him affection when he was a baby, but since I was trying to do it right I made sure I did even though it made me uncomfortable. He's literally my best friend now and I'm super comfortable being affectionate with him now. I've also gotten more comfortable being affectionate with others, like friends, since becoming a mom. I liken parenthood to my own CBT that happened to work out. Not a therapist, but I did a lot of work with young guys as a mentor in my military career. Had a guy who wanted to talk to chaps, I asked him why. He then went into graphic detail about how he had been assaulting women. The kicker was he wasn't going in to confess or because he felt guilty. He wanted chaps to get him into the psych clinic because that was where his girlfriend was. Not a therapist, this happened to my medical psychology teacher, psychiatrist. Guy comes in. First time, has appointment. He is greeted by my teacher's secretary. Doctor is with another patient, running 5 minutes late. Patient is upset because he was told he would go in at X time sharp. He sits down. After 5 minutes the patient gets fed up, stands up from the reception's chair, goes to the secretary's desk, grabs the 15-inch CRT computer monitor and crashes it into the secretary's skull. He leaves, calmly. Secretary suffers several vertebral fractures along with a skull fracture. I don't know if the police caught the patient afterwards. In the state I live, to receive any type of mental health services, you need a diagnostic assessment, i.e. you tell your story and get a diagnosis. My job is to do these assessments and determine what services you qualify for/need, so I hear a lot. I went out to do this assessment and guy starts out telling me he's been on and off incarcerated since 13 for a huge variety of things, assault, robbery, etc. He's 31 and spent over 16 years in jail/prison. Not super unsoul. Anyways, details/context matters, so I ask. He starts telling me about all the assaults he's committed. He beat his child's mother nearly to death and has no remorse for it. She's dead now, so it doesn't matter, does it? He's currently facing charges for felony assault for beating his toddler's teacher nearly to death as well. He pauses, drinks some cough syrup, then proceeds to tell me how he doesn't mind prison because he likes the fights. He will instigate them by spitting on dudes to start shit. He is a massive man at over 306 feet 4 inches and so doesn't lose often. All information collaborated by his probation officer who warned that no providers should ever meet him alone. True lack of empathy is a messed up thing. Or the guy who would tell me about his horrific, violent dreams and his hatred of other people. For example, he started dreaming, in his teens, about 3 mannequins, a blonde, a brunette, and a redhead. The redhead would bite her own fingers off and blood would get everywhere and she'd laugh so he'd laugh. Honestly, it's not the people that do the messed up things. From doing assessments you learn everyone does those. It's the ones who are violent and have no empathy that are all sorts of nope. I am legitimately curious about this and looking forward to some serious answers. I provide ABA services to children and the majority of them are on the spectrum. One kid I have just rubs me the wrong way. There is a disconnect that I just can't quite put my hands on, which honestly could be the severity of his autism, but he is entirely too manipulative for comfort and totally knows more than he lets on. Example. One time he was throwing things at a teacher so his pencil or whatever got taken away. He said sorry, got the pencil back, then said I can't believe you fell for that and threw it at her again. I constantly waver on whether I'm working a kid with ASD or a young sociopath. What really separates this kid is that he knows the difference between right and wrong and does not seem to care. He insults other people constantly. Calls them stupid and when corrected will say, I wasn't trying to be nice. I kind of had an idea before I even met the guy. The fact that he had been referred after slaughtering a family and made the parents watch as he executed their children as punishment for the father having lost a bag of heroin that he was supposed to pass on to someone else. The police suspected his involvement in several other slayings. He had self-referred hoping that I would diagnose him as being unfit to stand trial. He turned out to be absolutely fascinating. He was absolutely guilty of everything he had been accused of and had been working as an enforcer for various drug cartels. During the interview, he tried to be very intimidating. He wasn't at all concerned with trying to trick me into thinking that he might have been mentally ill. He thought it would be enough to simply threaten me, that he or someone else would ensure something horrible happened to my family or I if he ended up in jail. Oddly enough, that opened the door to a discussion about where he learned to be so intimidating, about how it had been a very useful skill for him when he was growing up in an abusive family and surrounded by Maori tribal culture. He also had some insight into how this behavior was affecting him and what it had cost him. He was only a young guy, in his early 20s, but he had killed maybe 6 children and 10 adults since he was 17. He'd never loved. He never had any real friends. And he was probably genuinely depressed under all that hostility. But most of all, he was afraid. He didn't expect to survive jail, although most of his family were in various jails across the state. In the end, that conversation about the cost of his intimidating behavior was probably what helped him the most. He pleaded guilty in court. The prison's own forensic psychiatrist later contacted me to say that that conversation had played a lot on his mind and that he was genuine about wanting to reform, to have a normal life. His lawyer, on the other hand, was an abusive bitch of a woman who was furious about his courtroom confession and blamed me for his crisis of conscience, and her not getting paid. I work as security at a hospital. We see all kinds of psychiatric patients. Thankfully we are just a holding/transfer facility when it comes to that, but one in particular left me completely shaken. I can't go into too much detail, confidentiality laws and all that, but this guy had just assaulted his mother. She later died, I was told, and instead of taking him to jail, our local sheriff's office brought him to us for evaluation and placement. I will never forget the look in his eyes or the feeling I got from him before I knew his situation and why he was there. Outwardly he seemed to be an amenable guy, charming even if you were just listening to him. He was extremely polite and kind with his words, but his body language and eyes didn't match his vocal mannerisms. At all. His eyes were just flat, smiles didn't reach them, and you could practically feel this guy scoping you out for weakness. It was like spiders crawling up my spine every time I had to interact with him. Dude was like a tiger stalking his prey. I don't know if you've ever been in a violent situation before, but if you have, you know that feeling of danger and violence right before it breaks out? He exuded that for his entire stay. He was there for maybe a handful of hours before the staff told the cops in no uncertain terms that he couldn't stay here. No one was comfortable with it at all. I'll never forget that for as long as I live, it was like looking into the abyss and finding out it actually does look back. Not a therapist, but I was diagnosed with ASPD when I was a teenager. I still believe it was a poor diagnosis, and as my current therapist. I do share quite a few traits with the disorder, but I also have empathy, and can feel emotions. My current diagnosis is schizoid or schizoaffective, although I also have no outlandish beliefs or hallucinations. Baby me was adverse to touch. I never wanted to be held, and the touch aversion continues on today. As a child I was a huge bully until I just became a loner. I don't know why. I remember gaining pleasure from hurting other kids, and then one day, I didn't anymore. Teenage me entered high school as very manipulative, self-destructive and egocentric. I mostly alternated between feeling totally void of emotion, being frightened of that void, and trying to fill that void with pain, mine or others. As a teenager I was very intelligent, not that it did me any favors. I would argue with my high school teachers until I beat them into submission or they got mad enough with me that I felt I had won. Then I got to college and discovered the game of ego can't be won with people who refuse to play. I didn't realize that until I had thrown away my full-ride scholarship, plus a few $1,000s of my own money. I think the major shift for me was having my daughter. It was a pure bond of love that I had honestly never felt before. I had felt love out of obligation, fear, and routine, and the emotion always felt hollow. I didn't feel like it looked in the movies, which I think is what led me to be so disassociated from the feeling. With my daughter it was different. I wanted to protect her, in a way I never had even thought of another human being before. Up until that point, if I had found out that every other person on the planet was actually a robot or a figment of my imagination, I would only have felt satisfaction that I was right. My daughter was the first person who really felt like she was also a living human being like me. I work at an intermediate care facility for adults with developmental disabilities. The facility cares for people that are very difficult to care for in a community setting. So most of the people are either extremely medically fragile, exhibit very violent behavior, or are legal offenders who are not in jail because of their disabilities. We had a resident who presented very well most of the time. He was smart and could easily have held a job and lived on his own in the community. Almost all the time he was nice to people and didn't cause much trouble. Then one evening when staff were not looking, he went to one of the residents who was physically unable to protect himself, held open his eyes, and poured chili powder in them. I treated a guy who would rip the heads off of turtles, frogs, and birds. He told me that was his stress relief. One day he came in with a necklace or all the decaying heads. We checked him into a facility shortly after. I'm not a therapist, but my mother used to work in the care system in sort of group homes, basically where the kids were before they were fostered out in the 70s and 80s. I'm not sure exactly what they were called. I remember her telling me there was one boy that no one was allowed to be alone with, and she was sure they were kidding about him. Nope, in the middle of playtime, he wrapped his hands around her throat and whispered this is what it'd feel like to kill you. From memory he was only about 4 or 5, and I'm not too sure what happened to him after my mom left that job. It stuck in my mind because of all the cases my mom came across, children who had been abused in some absolutely sickening ways, and in ways I'd never thought possible. This is the one that shook her the most. This is a woman who is unflappable in 99% of situations, too. Also a psych nurse. We've had many sociopaths through our unit in the 9 years I've been here. Only one truly sticks out for me though, 40-something-year-old, white male with seemingly no psychosis to be noted when I met him. He was covered head to toe in tattoos with many being offensive, including SS and swastika tattoos was one indicator. I read into his history and he had worked as a bouncer and ended up throwing a 20-year-old patron through a second-story plate glass window to the sidewalk below, killing him. He got a manslaughter conviction over it and was out of remand in no time. When I met him, he was very nonverbal, but when he did speak, it was chilling. He's one of only 2 people I've ever met that I was genuinely afraid of, and I'm 6 feet and was 250 pounds at that time. I didn't like looking him in the eyes but made a point of it, so as not to show weakness. His eyes were entirely empty. It felt like you were looking into a soulless void, as cliché as that may sound. When he was angry, he didn't show it, he simply stared blankly at you, which was more than unsettling. I tried not to be too hard-nosed with him for worry that he would stick a pencil in my neck or something, but we eventually found steady footing through mutual respect. He even did me the solid of warning me that his belongings that were brought in would contain Hep C infected needles that he had used for drug use. When we discharged him, I stated that he would kill someone again, and he did. About a year later, I read about him going to a high-ranking crime boss's home, knocking on the door, and shooting him 3 times when he opened the door. I wasn't surprised, but I really hope he stays in prison. He belongs there. Okay, this isn't about ASPD but more HPD. A friend of mine who works in mental health told me about a guy who was so unstable he was in a secure unit where they did a thing called 5-on-1, which basically means 24 hours a day there are at least 5 people close to him constantly. Why? You ask. Well, apparently his histrionic personality disorder was so bad when he was in a 2-on-1 situation from hurting himself previously, he decided he wasn't getting enough attention, so he attempted to rip out his eyeball/S. I forget if it was 1 or 2. That attempt was successful. This is why he is now 5-on-1 and partially/completely blind. I was stunned when my friend told me, imagine what kind of quality of life that guy has. As always, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, show your support. Leave your thoughts and opinions down below.